So whether you think Mace Windu legitimately beat Palpatine, or if you thought Palpatine lost the duel on purpose, the thing that is clear, like that can't be debated, is that Mace Windu died and Palpatine lived. Some chalk this up to being the grand plan of Palpatine. It was what he wanted to do. He wanted to seem weak, and that is how Mace Windu was defeated. Or that if Anakin was never there, Palpatine would have been toast. For me, I actually put the blame mostly on Mace Windu himself, and I put the specific blame on him within the scope of Vapad and his use of it, and I think he kind of went a little bit too dark side and got too tunnel vision because of it.
First, I kind of want to talk about the way in which I'm going to be discussing this topic. It's going to be more freeform. It's not going to be scripted. It's going to be more about talking points. First, I'm going to read a few passages from Revenge of the Sith, talk about the nature of Vapad itself, or Vapad itself, excuse me. Also talk about Shatterpoint, why I think it's a little bit overrated, specifically in this scenario, why I think it's not as infallible as some people make it out to be. Also, talking about Palpatine and what he was doing to subvert Mace Windu. First off, the very first thing I want to point out is that when Anakin in the novelization, and by the way, this whole entire discussion is really more so around the novelization, because that's where we get more insight into the inner musings of Mace Windu than what we get in the movies. The movie, we just kind of get the face value of the situation, but not the full spectrum of what it is. And I have an ice cream truck coming across the my window, so we're gonna cut right here. So after Anakin finally confesses to Mace Windu about who Palpatine actually is, there's a passage in the book that goes like this. The tangled web of fault lines in the forest he had seen, connecting Anakin to Obi-Wan and to Palpatine, was no more. In their place was a single spider knot that sang with power enough to crack the planet. Anakin no longer had Shatterpoints. He was the Shatterpoint, or he was a Shatterpoint, the Shatterpoint. Everything depended on him, everything. So right here, from the get-go, we're already kind of getting what Mace Windu is doing. He's getting that tunnel vision for Anakin, or just getting the tunnel vision for just a single aspect. And in this first case, it's about Anakin. He understands intimately that Anakin is the biggest reason for why something can succeed or fail, and ultimately is the reason why Mace Windu does not want to take Anakin with him to confront Palpatine, because he feels that he is too unstable. Mace Windu can sense this great darkness in Anakin, and he does not want to test the waters, even though he is the chosen one, and even though by prophecy he is supposed to be the one who is supposed to thwart the dark side, and if Palpatine is this great dark lord, Anakin probably should go with, but because of this feeling that Mace gets, he decides not to take him. Now keep this in mind, because this is going to come up a little bit later in my argument about why Mace Windu might have let Vapad take over him and may have conquered him. The thing about this form, this lightsaber form, especially within the Jedi classical forms, it never really has been truly mastered. Now, previous to this, Mace Windu developed this style with the help of Sora Bulk. And as we know from the Legends continuity, Sora Bulk fell to the dark side. He also taught this to, well, not Mace directly, but Sora Bulk taught Vapad to Quinlan Vos, which Mace advised against. Mace knows intimately that this is a bad form for most people, most Jedi to use, even if you're a Jedi Master, which Quinlan Vos was. The person who I felt got closest to mastering Vapad besides Mace Windu, who I do think he's a master, even though I think he had a slip-up moment within the confines of him fighting Palpatine, would be Deba Balaba. I think Deba Balaba, who was Mace Windu's, I believe, one-time apprentice. I think within Legends continuity, she is the only apprentice that he's ever taken on, though there might be something out there where that is false. I don't know. I don't feel like looking it up, but I'm pretty sure that's his only apprentice. She came closest to not being completely conquered by it, but her time on Horan Kal and the early part of the war, she too got corrupted by it. So really, up until this point, there really isn't anyone who has mastered this ability, this craft. And it's really hard to do so because a Jedi gets so close to the dark side, so very close. They are, by definition, sort of using the dark side. It's just that they are, if they're doing it successfully, they're letting it roll off of them and then funnel back out, which initially Mace Windu does within the fight. Now, before I get to that point, I also, if you want to get more insight about this in a more structured format, I talk about this in more detail in my Mace versus Palpatine video about who was in control. There's a whole sequence where the reason Mace was able to conjure up the power to even face against Palpatine, this extreme power in the dark side, to even have Vapad work in the first place is because he has this undying love for the Republic. And it even made me think, maybe in the future I'll do another video about Mace Windu and which Hogwarts house he would be in. But right now, just based on my rereading of this sequence, I would say he's a Hufflepuff. He has such a dedicated loyalty to the Republic, and he has this whole quote that's, "Jedi do not fight for peace, that's only a slogan. It is misleading as slogans always are. Jedi fight for civilization, because only civilization creates peace." So by proxy, he loves the Republic because he loves peace, and the representation of peace is civilization. And so with that in mind, with him finding out that his world has crashed down around him because for these 3 years, he's been fighting for the enemy, and he has not been fighting for peace, he's been fighting for more corruption. That kind of motivation is what stirs within him to make him as powerful as he is. But by that same token, I believe it makes him tunnel vision with Vapad. I don't think he conquered Vapad successfully. I think he did in a technical sense. He mastered Vapad in the sense that he was able to enact its moveset, its technique. He was able to contend with Palpatine blade to blade and even disarm him. And I do believe I'm one of those people who falls into the camp that he legitimately disarmed Palpatine and that he is a greater lightsaber duelist than Palpatine was. I don't believe, at least in that portion of the fight, that Palpatine was throwing it, though ultimately I do think he threw it towards the end of the fight. But again, if you want to see my more insights into what I think about that, I have a video about that. While I do believe Mace had a technical mastery of the form, I don't think the psychological and mental part, I believe Vapad conquered him in that moment. Now, towards the end of the fight, before Mace Windu does the disarm, in the prose it specifically states that there was an impasse in the fight, like the superconducting loop of Palpatine's power going out into Mace sending that back through his lightsaber technique and the lightsaber duel itself. It could have gone on forever. It was a straight impasse. And like the prose says, it says the fight might have gone on forever if Vapad was Mace Windu's only gift. And this is when it brings up the aspects of Shatterpoint. Now, what Shatterpoint does, for those who don't know, is that Jedi can see the fissures of the Force, or the possibilities that can happen. It's kind of similar to Doctor Strange and the Time Stone and seeing all the possibilities that you can do, but a little bit more imprecise than it is in Doctor Strange. It's more about a feeling. It's kind of like if you follow this path or the other path, you're more likely to break your opponent. You can see the weakness of your opponent. And in this case, what Mace feels for, again, as he did previous, is that when Anakin shows up at the tail end of his fight with Palpatine, he can see that Anakin is the most important aspect. Like the Shatterpoint he feels is all Anakin at that point, not that it's Palpatine that he has to focus on. Yet he still focuses all his attention on Palpatine. He's just gung-ho about, I need to kill Palpatine. There's nothing else we can do about this. It's funny because I feel like if he did adhere to his original Shatterpoint, if he followed the path all the way to Anakin and saw what possibility Anakin had, it's quite possible that he could have defeated Palpatine with the help of Anakin if he let that play out, if he had a conversation with Anakin instead of just saying no to him straight out. Or even I think he has a line that says, like, you can tell me the difference, because he brings up that, was there a difference when you killed Dooku, which is kind of like a sore wound for Anakin, because he knows that he should not have done that. He's like, that's not the Jedi way. Mace slaps him in the face and just says, hey, you can tell me the consequences after I do this, or you can tell me the difference after I kill this Sith Lord. And that's kind of funny to me that, he kind of put that in his face, and he's like, yeah, no, like, you killing Dooku is no different from me killing Palpatine right now. And the reason that he was so tunnel vision on just Palpatine, kill Palpatine, that's all he was thinking. He wasn't able to see as he usually can. Like, Shatterpoint is very effective if you're letting yourself see all those possibilities, if you're letting yourself see the weakness of your opponent. And since he was not doing that, his hand got chopped off. But yeah, I believe that Vapad was the vessel in which Mace Windu's death came about, and it was his own fault. Like, I think that if he would have turned that switch off, like, it's good that he was able to get to the point that he did, defeating Palpatine with his power, getting him disarmed, but at that point, he's got to switch that off and be able to see the entirety of the Force, not just the one aspect of it. And so there might have been a better outcome. I mean, granted, I do understand that, you would have your guard up like crazy high against someone who is this powerful, but at the same time, as a Jedi, you're supposed to balance those two. You're always supposed to have the ability to turn on combat mode, but also see the clarity of each possibility and situation. So yes, ultimately I do think that Vapad in a way conquered Mace Windu in the same way that, you know, Depa got conquered and Sora Bulk got conquered. And if anything, I think Quinlan Vos is the only Jedi Master to conquer the psychological aspect of Vapad itself and not be corrupted by it. Granted, I do think, you know, he did have his help from Master Thulm and Aayla Secura. But yeah, I think that's really it. Again, this was a more loose conversation that I wanted to have about Mace Windu and the nature of Vapad and how it may have ultimately conquered him and corrupted him and was the harbinger of his ultimate demise against Palpatine. But that's all I have for you guys today. What do you guys think? Was Vapad Mace Windu's undoing? Let me know in the comments below. And as always, peace, love, and may the Force be with you.